As we approach the first presidential election debate, what are the likely outcomes of the 2024 election? Israel rescues 4 hostages as Benny Gantz quits the governing coalition. Elections for the European Parliament have upset the political order in Europe. What will be the fallout? Welcome to Inside Israel News, your home for American conservative commentary on world affairs and thorough and unbiased analysis of Israeli news, politics, and current events in the Middle East. Or as the internet trolls say, mouthpiece of the Zionist conspiracy, spokesman for the elders of Zion, highly paid propagandist of the Mossad. Yeah, no. This is Inside Israel News. I'm your host, Isaac Kite. Welcome back, Insiders. It is I, your lovable lawnsman, your gregarious Vulcan, your mad genius, your shadow president, your prophet of things to come. Got a new title, Prophet of Things to Come. I'll discuss why here in the episode. Man, what a week. I don't even have words. I worked so hard to get my last episode out on Friday. Like I've got Shabbat coming up, right? I can't do any work. So I worked really hard Friday afternoon to get the episode out, and I got it out, and I go to bed. Oh, thank God, the episode's out that night. And I wake up the next day to the news that Israel's rescued 4 hostages. Thank God, Baruch Hashem, amazing thing has happened. But, the day after I record my episode, right? So if I'd waited till Sunday, which I probably wouldn't have had time to record, then I'd have had the great news. Noah Argamani and 3 other hostages rescued. Thank God. No, one of the haunting images and videos from 10/7 was the image of Noah Argamani being loaded on the back of a motorcycle and dragged off, and you can see the horror in her face as she's being taken hostage. She and the other hostages undergoing such just horrific treatment at the hands of the terrorists who took them. So she's back home, and thank God. Unfortunately, her mother had lost consciousness. Her mother is dying of brain cancer, but she was able to be there next to her mother while her mother was still technically alive. I think I had reported her mother had passed, but it wasn't that she had passed, that she had lost consciousness. And at the very least, Noah made it back in time to be with her mother in her final moments. I mean, this is horrendous, to take people away from their families. And to this day, Ariel and Kafir Bibas, 2 little boys, Kafir just 1 year old. I don't have a way to express it. It is so horrifying that these kids are still in custody there, and we don't even know if they're still alive, knowing their captors. So these are the kinds of horrors that we're facing, and there are still 120 hostages. We hope that they are still alive, all of them, but in the way that things have been going, we keep finding bodies, and Hamas has now said that they're working to make sure that they'll kill any hostages that we attempt to rescue. So we may not get back any more alive, but thank God, Baruch Hashem, we managed to get some back. That was great news. Benny Gantz quit the coalition, European elections, all kinds of things going on. I have it all for you, all here. And things going on, Hezbollah, Lebanon. Funny thing, if you listen to this show, if you're an Israel insider, you already knew what was going to happen and about when it was going to happen, because I told you months ago what was likely to happen and when it was going to happen. Because, like I say, you're prophet of things to come. When you listen to this show, you get to hear the headlines before they're the headlines, and you have an idea of what's coming next. There are always surprises, obviously. I didn't know when 10/7 was going to happen, but I did say that this last summer. I talked about, over the past couple of years, the things that Hamas would do if they had access to Israeli civilians, and I was commenting that the Palestinians were becoming increasingly irrelevant, and that they were going to do what they could to become relevant once again. So you had some idea, those of you insiders who were paying attention, you had some idea things were coming. In any case, get your 20 IQ points for listening. Bonus points just for listening. This is going to be another great episode of Inside Israel News. I wanted to bring those tidings of good news. We celebrate life. We believe that little children should grow up and be happy. We believe that people should live and work and succeed and all those good things. And we don't believe that people should be killed. And so when we are able to rescue people, oh, thank God. It once again, our celebration of life. And that's something that we all share here in the West, that our enemies do not. So with that, I will jump into some lighthearted entertainment news. Somewhat lighthearted, unfortunately. I'm talking about loss, but thankfully it's people who lived out their lives and passed from natural causes. We lost Willie Mays this week. Terrible loss. Big Giants fan myself. I love baseball. They're not doing so well this year, but who knows? Maybe. Maybe. Believing, right? So if you know, you know. But we'll see what happens. But I just remember going to games and seeing Willie Mays in the stands, bumping into him up in the stadium, just seeing him around. I mean, he was always, those old ball players. He came from the Negro League that when blacks couldn't even play in professional baseball, and then he and Jackie Robinson and so many other great players broke that barrier down and came to play in the game. And he made an incredible contribution. I mean, 660 home runs, still quite a record. I mean, he's up there with Hank Aaron and Barry Bonds, other great players. But the players from that era, people like Willie Mays, just always gregarious, always funny, always had a joke to tell or something funny to say. Like I said, always good with kids. Just, it was a joy to go to a game and for Willie to be there, and you could enjoy it. And it was always entertaining. And he's going to be missed. I really feel that the sports world is a little diminished. We're losing some of the greats. Now, obviously, we have new players, and some of them are really good guys too, and we have opportunities for new great achievements and records to be broken and these kinds of things in the future. But, that just, what a life Willie Mays led, Born in a time when segregation was still legal in the South, when he couldn't even play in Major League Baseball for many years of his career, and to live to a time like today where we've already had a black president, where we have greater integration. I mean, times have changed. What a time to have lived the life of Willie Mays, right? And another life along similar time frame, Donald Sutherland. And I mention him because I've actually shared some of his jokes on the show here. I love Donald Sutherland. I watched MASH a little bit as a kid. I used to stay up late and watch Nick at Night and some of the old TV shows that were on late at night, the reruns of shows from years past. And I always enjoy the funny episodes they had there. But I always think of him as Oddball, Sergeant Oddball from Kelly's Heroes, one of the movies I loved as a kid. And he was, always with those negative waves. Being a little bit of a hippie myself, being from a hippie part of California, back when we used to be chill and cool in kind of a hippie sort of way. Peace, dude. It was just hilarious to think, we're in World War II, we're in a tank, and he's, always with those negative waves, and just, being kind of a hippie, and it was a great performance. He was a great actor, and another way in which we're diminished. We're losing some of the great character actors, unfortunately. We just don't have some of that talent. No, we have new talent, yes, but the way Hollywood's going right now and all the wokeness out there, I don't know if people like Donald Sutherland could get going today. I mean, you can't do comedy without offending someone, right? There aren't many good movies that are made anymore. And, and maybe it's a Jewish thing. I'll just say we like to laugh at ourselves. I mean, Mel Brooks comedy, like half his jokes are Jewish jokes, and us making fun of ourselves. You have to take things in life with a little laughter. You have to have a little fun. Donald Sutherland's legacy is that he made us laugh. He made, during good times and bad, he entertained us. And he will leave that legacy forever, especially with this show, because you're going to hear that line over and over again as I joke about things. So he is missed. So real quick here, before I go into American news, let's talk about the details of the hostage rescue, because I really wish I'd had time to talk about it in my last episode, which came out the day before it happened. So, not being a very good prophet, was I? I should have waited one more day. The old joke, you walk into the psychic's office and it's like, hey, who is it? And you're like, oh, you're not expecting me? So, anyway, they had the 4 hostages being held at the house of a purported journalist, Al Jazeera, one of these terror journalists we have. They're being beaten every day, made to do, labor in the house. And I'm not saying that doing dishes or cleaning a house is in some way demeaning or whatever. I do some of that stuff myself, obviously. We have a house and the dishes have to be done. And right now, my dear wife, the love of my life, is very pregnant with number 7. So, I'm doing some of that too when I'm home, not traveling for work. But I mean, being forced to, being a slave, being beaten daily and tormented and treated like less than a person. I mean, these are the horrors that these people want to inflict. So Israel was able to rescue them, and some of the details of it are just awesome. They came in an aid truck. One soldier, unfortunately, was killed in action rescuing them, but we got those 4 hostages out, and like I said, Baruch Hashem, thank God we did. And of course, the aftermath, immediately, the Hamas, Gaza Health Ministry, Hamas, right? 200 Palestinians killed, including children, and the whining and the wailing and gnashing of teeth, and oh God, it's horrible, 200 people for 4. You're damn right. These people came into our country, into Israel, violated Israeli territory, murdered, tortured, raped, and took hostages. And they started this war. And if you're holding hostages in your house, you're not a civilian. You're just another form of combatant, right? And so this is what happened. Now, there were some videos that were taken of it right afterwards. And these videos, their Pallywood is really good. So they clean up a little bit before they do the video. And of course it's jerking around, so you can't really see anything. And they're out wailing and yelling and screaming in the streets and all these, people that are dead. And as you watch the video, this video that came out right after the rescue, they're all military-age young men. And while there are no guns around, you can see shell casings on the ground. And the guys are laying on the ground in positions that look like they had a gun in their hands. Right? Now, the guns have been conveniently removed because our Pallywood producers really know what they're doing, right? But, you can see that these guys were not innocent bystanders just shot for being there, okay? Israel claims about 100 were killed. You can tell that this happened because they struck back. Like, once the rescue was in progress and Hamas figured out that the rescue was, they attacked the rescuers. They tried to prevent them from escaping. And so that led to more strikes in defense of the rescue forces. And obviously the hostages out. I don't know, how they do this, the 200. I mean, we're still trying to figure out exactly how many people died on 10/7. Every now and then, as they rummage through what's left of the remains, we find another person who was killed in the attack and not taken hostage. And that's, 9 months later, right? But the Palestinians always know exactly how many people have been killed. I mean, when the Islamic Jihad rocket fell short in the parking lot of the Shifa hospital, right? They were able to report that Israel had bombed the hospital and killed 500 people. Just nice round number that they just, wow. And here, 204 people were killed. Just these numbers. So it must be that everyone in Gaza, for being an open-air prison and they're so starving and they're oppressed, everyone must have like a Fitbit or an Apple Watch or something that tells you when their heart stops beating. Because, I mean, they're just able to come up with these numbers and aggregate these numbers, just incredible accuracy and so quickly. I mean, it's amazing, right? I mean, they're really good at this. I don't know, clairvoyance, something like that, magic. I guess they're getting it from Allah, right? It's like somehow someone is telling them these magical numbers. And usually they're twice the actual number of people killed. And again, these are deaths that resulted from holding hostages, which is a war crime, and, from attacking the rescue forces. You attack our people and you take our people hostage, we're going to come get them. And if you're in the way, you're going to die. That's how this is going to go. Okay? We're fighting back. So just an incredible thing. And it back to the, Israeli special forces are really good at what they do. And I can't give enough credit to the men and women of the units that were involved on the ground, those who were the pilots, the helicopter, everyone who was watching, all the operational people, the fighter pilots, everyone who participated in the operation. Just incredible. Thank you. Toda rabah. Cannot express gratitude at any higher level. Now, I'm sure Noah Argamani and the other hostages who were rescued are much more grateful than I. So I will let their gratitude shine on my behalf. Just a beautiful thing. And of course, there's the response from Yahya Sinwar, the tunnel rat, the Hamas commander in Gaza that we had shortly thereafter. Oh, it's so great that because they're turning down the ceasefire. It's like, it's great that civilians are dying. We want more people to die because that's good for our cause. Nice guy. Man, that's the kind of guy I want to be in charge. Holy mackerel. It's amazing, these people. I mean, you look back at people we used to think were evil. Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong, these people. And they were, certainly, and on a scale that Hamas could only dream of. But even then, I mean, when the Allies were bombing Japan or bombing Germany, those regimes lamented the deaths of the people who were killed. Right? Nobody celebrated. Nobody thought, hey, isn't it great? Americans are firebombing Tokyo. 100,000 people are killed. Right? Now, obviously, after that Operation Meeting House, maybe it would have been time to sit down with the emperor and say, okay, so guys, radical notion here. How about we surrender? So we don't have another 100,000 so that they don't blow up more cities. God forbid they should come up with the ability to do this with one bomb instead of hundreds of bombs. One more time, as I've said it a million times since 10/7, this war ends tomorrow. It ends right now, this instant, if the hostages are released and Hamas surrenders. They throw down their guns or come out with their guns up, their hands up, and surrender and give us our hostages back. This is over. It's done. We have no interest in fighting this war except to protect our people from future attack and to rescue our people who are still held hostage. And so, I have to say these things because people are so inane. I mean, Jews are sniveling, conniving trolls with horns on their heads and blood matzah and secret space lasers. So, of course, we'd be the kind of people who'd have some kind of, nasty ulterior motive, committing genocide. Even if the Hamas numbers were correct and there were like 30,000 people killed. I mean, most incompetent genocide in history. Right, the Palestinian population, Palestinian Arab population has increased 400%, 450% since 1967, when Israel liberated those territories in which they live. And I don't know how you define genocide, but before the Second World War, there was something like 13 million Jews living in Europe, and after the war, there were 7 million. Right, that's 7 million is a lower number than 13 million, a very particular number, right? So, that's how that works. When people, increase their population 4 times, that's not genocide. And if there are 2 million people in Gaza, even 30,000 isn't genocide. But, of course, more accurate numbers are being, the UN's cutting the numbers in half, and even the UN works for Gaza, works for Hamas. So, the UN, Hamas, same thing. You could use those terms interchangeably. United Hamas, Hamas Nations, United Nations of Hamas. Anyway, so we're talking about somewhere, Israel says, 15,000, they're saying 19,000, and less than a 1-to-1 ratio of civilians to combatants. Just incredible work by the IDF to have the best urban combat record in history. These are not numbers we want to celebrate. We don't want to have to kill those people, right? We don't want this war to be happening. It's happening because we were attacked. Just like the United States didn't want the Second World War either. Funny thing, we were attacked. So all of that. But the way in which Hamas celebrated 10/7 and shared these videos and they were dancing in the streets and showing the world, publishing for all to see the horrors that they had committed. Even the Nazis tried to cover up what they did. At the last minute, they tried to bury the bodies at the concentration camps. They tried to blow up the furnaces. They tried to hide the horrible crimes that they had committed. So horrible people though they were, at least somewhere, they knew that what they were doing was wrong, and they really didn't want people to know about it, right? And they really couldn't defend it at Nuremberg, right? I mean, Hermann Goering killed himself, fitting in for a coward who kills innocent people, right? As part of a regime that kills innocent people, and of course, he commanded the Luftwaffe, which killed many, many innocent people. In any case, so all things put into perspective, we got our hostages back, thank God, and these people are telling you who they are. Yahya Sinwar is telling you who he is. Right, he's telling you his character. Hamas is showing us who they are, the kind of horrors that they want to commit again and again and again until they achieve their goal, which is the annihilation of the Jewish people. So there you are. And if that's what you're supporting, if that's what you're for, guess what? You're an anti-Semite. That's just how it works. All right, so let's tone it down from that. Talk about politics here in the U.S., and then I'll get into Israeli news and international events. Big things going on in Europe. Oh, man. So many great things to talk about. U.S. presidential politics. Much less serious topic. A lot less emotion to it, I hope. Though things are pretty intense right now. So there you are. Looking at the polls, hearing things out there that are really hilarious. Peter Zion is out saying he thinks there's going to be a Republican wipeout. Really? Where does that come from? And you have okay. Again, there's as I've told you, it frustrates me so much that you have people who are so intelligent, right, who are capable of great thinking and great knowledge and perspicacity, you know what I mean, that are out there. And they can be totally deluded and say the most ridiculous things. Just where does this come from? So there he is predicting a Republican wipe. Well, first of all, let me just, back up for a second. Trump is still leading in all the polling averages. There have been just a few polls that have come out showing Biden a few points ahead here and there, and that's brought some of the averages down, but Trump is still competitive. He's still in the race. But the Senate, at this point, it's almost a foregone conclusion that the Republicans will control the Senate. So let me just take the Senate for a second here. Right, you've got so many competitive races that shouldn't be competitive, right? The only race that anyone's talked about on the Republican side in terms of defending Republican seats, existing Republican incumbents or red seats, let's just say, the only race that anyone's even talked about is Ted Cruz versus Colin Allred. Colin Allred just got busted for flip-flopping on immigration, and that's not a good look in Texas. Texans are not stupid people. They are they're smarter than that. Shout out to Benji Gershon and the Dallas Jewish Conservatives. I love that group. I've spoken there a few times, and so if you're in Texas, go check them out. Schlep on down. Come see one of their events. Just a great time. He knows how to throw an event. So good times there. But in any case, I've seen Ted a number of times, and he's not going anywhere. He's going to win that race. So that's the only one that's even close. Meanwhile, we have Jim Justice in West Virginia, where there's not even any point in trying to run again. So Joe Manchin has quit, right? I mean, there's just no point. He's supposed to be a moderate Democrat, but he's voted woke enough times that West Virginians just aren't interested in him anymore. So former Governor Justice is going to be running for that seat, and of course, basically is a shoo-in. So that's a Republican gain right there. Not much anyone can do about that. Well, assuming Ted Cruz wins, and that's a safe bet, and the Republicans are able to defend all of the other seats, which they are by double digits, there's not much chance that Republicans are going to fall below 50 seats, right? Now, 50 seats plus the vice presidency, if Donald Trump should win the presidency, is control of the Senate, right? Meanwhile, there's this fascinating race going on over in Montana, where you have Tim Sheehy is giving John Tester a run for his money. Now, John Tester's voted woke way too many times, and of course, he's in Montana. It's a red state. It's polling for Trump by 20 points. Not doing well there. So it looks like Sheehy is going to unseat him. And if that's the case, all other things being equal, that's 51 seats, right? There are competitive races now in Maryland, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Nevada, and Arizona, right? So if you're counting with me, that's 8 more seats that are up for grabs. Now, the Democrats are going to defend some of those, right? I mean, Bob Casey in Pennsylvania, from a well-established political family, been in the Senate for many years. Like he pitches himself as a conservative Democrat, and these kinds of things. That race should not be close. That should be a blowout. That shouldn't even be. We shouldn't even be talking about that. The fact that that's competitive. Sherrod Brown in Ohio, that shouldn't be competitive, right? But people are tired of the economic situation. They're looking at these guys and they're, hey, what are you guys doing? You're voting woke. You're voting with Biden, and the country's going downhill. Why? What's going on here? Hey, that's what's up. So again, all of these races, and the GOP has a good chance of winning 1 or 2 of those, at least. Now, if Donald Trump wins in a big, let's call it a landslide, but if he wins bigly, as he would say, big league, I have the greatest victories. My victories are the very best. I have, they're the best victories. We have the greatest victories. We're going to make victory great again. If Donald Trump wins by a big margin, chances are the Republicans will pick up several more seats in the Senate in a number of these states. So, again, any of those just augment the majority. It's my hope that the GOP gains, because we're already at +1 net at this point. That's the outlook that, with West Virginia, I'm hoping to pick up at least 3 more seats, in part because we have a couple of Republicans in the Senate, and I won't name names, Collins, Murkowski, who are not very reliable votes. And in the case of Murkowski, I mean, basically she should just be a Democrat. But at this point, so having 53 seats with the R would be much better. But at least if we had 52, the vice president, whoever that might be, if Trump were to win, could be a tie-breaking vote. In any case, the Senate looking pretty good for Republicans. The House is much closer, in part because Republican leadership has been something of a clown show. You've got Moscow Marjorie Taylor Greene and all this nonsense going on. It doesn't make us look good. And as a result, the House is kind of up for grabs. Sometimes you see polls the generic Democrats a little ahead, sometimes the generic Republicans a little ahead. The Republicans have gained control of Congress with the generic Democrat leading. I saw a poll of the 44 most competitive seats right now, and it's tied in terms of the generic Democrat versus the generic Republican, 45 apiece, right? So, I mean, they're up for grabs. Right, it's up in the air. And so chances are, if Donald Trump wins, there will be the votes there. The GOP will gain a few seats in the House and retain control. If Joe Biden wins, even by a narrow margin, they'll probably gain a few seats. They only have to gain a few seats, and the Democrats will probably control the House. But, Peter Zion, the Republicans are going to Republican wipeout. And it's like, Peter, seriously, where, what are you smoking, dude? You're up there in the mountains or whatever. I mean, don't eat the mushrooms, okay? It's just wild. Where these numbers, these ideas. I mean, right now everything looks up in the air. It looks pretty good for the GOP in the Senate, especially if Trump were to win re-election as president. For the House, again, that's probably going to go with the presidential winner. It could go either way. I mean, it's possible for Biden to win and Republicans to retain the majority, right? That could mean a Republican Congress for Biden in his second term, right? Or it's possible for Trump to win and the Democrats narrowly squeak in a couple seats and take control of the House. Who knows? Okay, those are up in the air. But chances are the House is going to go the way the presidential election goes, because that's kind of where we're at right now. With things being tied, it's going to be a question of turnout, who's excited to vote, where, what districts, and that kind of thing. Unfortunately, whether you have competitive districts or not, red voters in blue states don't tend to turn out like red voters in red states, right? And blue voters in red states don't turn out like they do in blue states. So, that's going to be different. It's going to be up in the air. So we'll see how that goes. But all right, back to the presidential election. We got the debate coming up, and there's some things changing there. Yes, Trump's conviction has had an impact. He's been losing a little bit of ground with independents in some polls, depending on whom you poll, depending on how you poll. Some polls show him continuing to have the lead. Some show him a point down. He's still competitive. He's right there. Like, we're not talking about Biden taking a 5-point lead right now. No, like he's up in the 538 average by 0.2 of a point, right? we're talking about, not much. And that's an average of polls, right? So those will reflect sort of the long trend of polling, right? So it's still really competitive. Just a couple of things. I mean, I've seen polls out there, serious polls, Emerson Hill, Ipsos, polls that are not right-wing pollsters. And there are polls that show Trump leading in Minnesota. I mean, Minnesota's a blue state. It's close usually, but it always goes to the Democrat candidate, right? It's entirely possible he could win there. We have polls that show him in the lead. Who knew, right? Virginia. There was a poll in Virginia I saw just the other day, tied, right? Both of the candidates were tied. And that's something I've been talking about. In an election year where, Virginia is in play, where Minnesota is in play, that's not good for the Democrats. Like, if I'm the Democrat candidate, I'm going to find some way to get those votes back, because an election where Donald Trump wins Virginia is an election that's a landslide. It's over. I mean, he's going to win, Pennsylvania and Michigan, Wisconsin as well, right? I mean, there's not, he's not going to lose those states if he wins Virginia. And, Virginia would give him the election, depending on how the numbers all work out. So, again, we have that. There's a poll that was just published. Donald Trump had an 8-point deficit in New York. So Joe Biden is leading Donald Trump in New York, one of the bluest of blue states, by 8 points. Right? That should be a double-digit lead. Joe Biden should have no trouble getting reelected in New York. If they have to spend any money in New York to defend New York, that's going to be really bad. That's not good news. Okay? Not good news at all. Now, if you were a political party that was concerned about the popular will and wanted to answer to the public, you would immediately figure out why you're losing and you would change course. But that's not how this crowd works. So, they're trying to pretend that they're going to secure the border and all this kind of thing, but, good luck with that. So, not likely to happen. All right, so let's talk about CNN. CNN is freaking out. They're losing their minds. In the words of Gen Z, as they might say, they are losing their insert expletive for fecal matter here. Losing their poop. They are completely going nuts and bonkers over polls of the African American community. It seems Donald Trump has 22% of that community. There's a big shift going on. Usually the GOP candidate is lucky to get 7 or 8%. Donald Trump is getting 22 at the moment. Now, you look at 45 and older, and Biden's at something like 70-something percent. So he's gone down something like 16 points in terms of people who are saying they're going to vote for him. So that means there could be a large number of people in the black community who just don't turn out to vote, which that's not good news for Biden there. That just means they're going to have to stuff a whole lot more mail-in ballots into the ballot boxes on their behalf, right? And all the dead people. So that's that's somewhat comic, but it's happened. We have evidence of this happening. You have that. Then you go to 45 and under, and Donald Trump's polling at almost a third. And I think that you're seeing, especially among young black men, they are recognizing that the Democrats don't represent them anymore. Now, God, I wish Jews would, my fellow Jews, we've talked about for a long time, half the Jews in America really don't care. They're secular leftists or whatever, but I wish we could get more Jews to vote Republican and open their minds to that. There's so many people that are just stuck in, they don't understand that times have changed, right? And you want a president who's going to withhold military aid to our closest ally in Israel at their time of need, play these games that try to imply that somehow Israel is doing something wrong with the humanitarian planning in Rafah and all this kind of nonsense. We would never have that problem under Donald Trump. Okay, so in any case, the shift that's going on in the black vote has CNN completely bonkers. They're going nuts. They don't know what to make of it. And they keep talking about, well, when will this go back to normal? It's not going backwards, people. Those polls are going to go in one direction and one direction only. It's been noted, and I don't like this kind of commentary, but people are saying, well, now that Trump is a convicted felon, that he's more relatable to young black men. Not all young black men are convicted felons, so let's start with that. But there was at least one rapper who said so. He's out there saying, hey, look, Trump's a convicted felon like me. It's easier to relate to him now. Not in those words. Okay. So the point is that's an anecdotal point there, I suppose. And, you look at the poll numbers and what have you. Anyway, so it's happening. That shift is on, and it's driving the other side nuts. CNN is just losing it. They're losing their minds. And when you think about where the African-American population is distributed in the United States, if they poll in those numbers, if 22, 23% vote for Donald Trump in this election, you're going to see huge changes because, first of all, states like Georgia and North Carolina become redder, right? So those are now going to go from, lean red to likely red, okay? And in states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, and even Wisconsin, that could give Donald Trump the win, right? That shift could really push in that general direction. So that's that. So what we're seeing right now is Donald Trump is losing ground among independents. We don't know for how long. We don't know if any of those people will come back. You look at polls, 50%, they'll poll people, 50% say Donald Trump is a convicted felon and should go to prison, and 45% say he's not. And then you look at, Biden versus Trump, 45-45. Whatever. So you make of that what you will. So a lot of people don't care. But whatever percentage of independents do care, we don't know for how long they're going to hold out. But they may come back and vote for Trump on other issues in time, because this convicted felon thing is going to blow over. People will get tired of hearing it, okay? So what's going to happen in the election? Anyone's guess. At the moment, it looks good for the Republicans look like they're going to control the Senate. The presidential election is very close. It's anyone's game. The negatives for Biden are very high job disapproval. People are not happy about the economy, national security, all those kinds of things. And so it's that portends very badly for presidents usually. Now, of course, we're in a year where that doesn't matter. A lot of people aren't even going to care what the economic situation is. They're going to be orange man bad, or senile man, bad. So they're not voting based on those kinds of things. But we'll see how it all plays out. Last quick thing, on this particular topic, Trump floated a tax reform talking about getting rid of the income taxes and replacing them with consumption tax, sales tax, basically. Interesting notion that there are a lot of people on the right who are happy to hear those kinds of things. Now, you look at the numbers because, of course, you see where I'm going with this. Those of you who know, right, you get your 20 bonus IQ points. You know where I'm going. I'm about to talk about some numbers here. 52% of federal revenues, about $2.5 trillion, come from personal income taxes and payroll taxes. 8% come from corporate taxes, right? So 60% of the federal budget, federal revenues, that is the money from which they budget, which of course, we're in structural deficits and this kind of thing, $3.1 trillion come from income taxes. Well, we also have Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security that are funded from income taxes. So, huge chunk of the budget that comes from this. How could you replace that much revenue with a consumption tax, even like a 20% consumption tax? And, I've seen some numbers out there that are if you just look at the number, like if you could apply across the board an 11 or 12% consumption tax, value-added tax, as they call them in your VAT. Other people know what I'm talking about. Theoretically, you would be able to raise that $3 trillion. Obviously, since there would be no income taxes, people would only spend that money when they consume, right? And since your sales taxes, your state sales taxes and local sales taxes come on top of that, where I live in Kansas, the sales taxes are darn near 9%, right? They're trying to bring them down this year. But, let's just say on average, you have an 8% sales tax, local and state and all of that together, right? So, if there was 12% federal consumption, you're paying 20% every time you buy anything. Now, then we go to, we should exempt food and housing and automobiles from those, from the VAT. Well, then all of a sudden, you'd need like a 30% VAT to raise that kind of revenue, right? So you want to pay 38% on everything you buy that isn't food, housing, or an automobile, right? Almost 40% taxes on everything. So I mean that means if I bought an item for $100, I would be paying $140 for it almost to pay the taxes, right? That's a lot. So I just don't see how that's going to fly. I don't see how that's going to work, Donald. Replacing some income taxes. So, if you lowered personal income taxes, maybe set like a flat 10%, let's just say, and made up for that with some consumption taxes, maybe you could do that. And consumption taxes are fairer, right? If you're rich and you're consuming a lot of luxury goods, you're buying yachts, that kind of thing, you're going to be paying more taxes because you're consuming more. And if you are, a hardworking person who's, just out there working and trying to live, like myself, you're only going to pay consumption on the things that you buy. So it's going to be a percentage of your total consumption. So it is a fairer way to tax. And, there could be other ways. You could offer rebates to people in the lowest income brackets or people who are poor. But the point is, I just don't think that's going to fly. So, something else I disagree with Donald on. It's just something he floated or mentioned at some meeting, but it certainly has managed to get some press. But Donald knows that there's no such thing as negative press, no such thing as bad press, right? People talking about that helps him. It helps encourage people to vote for him, so if they like those kinds of plans. So now it's time to talk about vice presidents. This is one of those things that, it's not a very important office, because the vice president is just the president of the Senate and, essentially just succeeds the president. So there's not a lot that the vice president does in our constitutional system. But who the vice president is somewhat important. After all, both of our candidates for president are rather old, right? Trump's a healthy 79 now. I think I said the wrong number an episode back. But anyway, and, Joe Biden's not getting any younger either. And of course, questions of his competence. But, he seems to be sticking with Kamala Harris. And I see that there'd be some negative identity politics, maybe switching a woman out, what they would call a woman of color, for, say, a white man like Gavin Newsom. So I guess Biden is just going to he's not going to change horses. He's just going to stick with what he's got. Donald Trump, on the other hand, is wide open. So there are a couple of different reasons you choose a particular VP nominee. So just to speak on the topic generally before I get into what I think Donald Trump himself is looking at and what he might want to do. For one thing, there's the balance the ticket, right? Whatever the strengths of the candidate at the top of the ticket, you want to find someone who offsets their weaknesses, right? So if I'm strong on foreign policy, I might want a vice president who's good on domestic policy. If I'm an outsider, I might want an insider, a Washington insider who can counterbalance that. If I'm an insider, I might want an outsider who doesn't look quite so establishment. These kinds of things. And so that's one particular category. Another is sort of a more managerial vice president, someone that you really want to help. Sometimes that's kind of more of an insider role when you're balancing the ticket. That person can also double as assisting you. And a good example there, of course, is with JFK. JFK had been in the Senate for a number of years before he ran for president, obviously, but he was still very much a Washington outsider, kind of a young, radical hipster that in politics. So naturally, he chose Lyndon B. Johnson as his VP running mate because Johnson was the quintessential Washington insider, right? Texas drawl, who, had been in Washington for many years and knew the game and played it better than Kennedy did. So that was his choice there. Same thing, Ronald Reagan chose George H.W. Bush. He'd served a couple of terms in Congress, ambassador to the UN, director of the CIA. Very qualified, after serving 8 years as vice president, the most qualified president of the 20th century. The next after that would be maybe William Howard Taft, who was Secretary of State before he became president. It's just very, very qualified. But of course, he only had one term. Being qualified doesn't mean everything. So, you can have a managerial. Famously, Bush Jr. chose Dick Cheney as someone that could help him kind of run things in a certain way, go beyond the traditional VP role. But, whatever you think of that. I'm not a fan of Dick Cheney, so I have nothing but loathing for the Cheneys. So you don't want to ask me. But anyway. So those are common options. The other category, so the third category, is a true successor. There's really only once that a president has chosen a true successor, and that was, of course, in 1944. FDR and his people knew that he was not in good shape. He knew he wasn't in good health. So he chose Harry S. Truman, an outsider from the establishment. He'd been in Washington for a number of years, but he'd been going after, the various arms manufacturers who had been making piss-poor products, that hadn't been maintaining quality. And it's like, look, when you make things cheap to defraud the government, it just hurts our troops, our guys on the front lines, right? And so Harry Truman was famous for that. And so that made him a good choice for successor. I'm not sure anyone thought he would actually run for a second term and let alone win. But, FDR needed to get, he was the one they needed to get over the finish line. They really couldn't choose another candidate to run in 44, and Truman was the guy they chose to put on there. Now, Donald Trump is in an interesting position. He chose Mike Pence last time. That was definitely a balance the ticket thing, right? So Trump is kind of a political outsider, totally a political outsider. He's never held office before. And Mike Pence was the soft-spoken conservative governor of a Rust Belt state who was very qualified and a very nice guy, all the things Trump is not. He had all those strengths, and he helped to shore up the conservative branch of the coalition that Trump was putting together. So now you have that particular option. So those are just a couple of different options. So Donald Trump will go one of two ways, I think. One, he'll go the Mike Pence direction, obviously not Mike Pence himself, since he and Mike Pence have had a falling out, and Pence is part of the Never Trump crowd now. But he may choose an unassuming vice presidential nominee, somebody who will be on the ticket but not run for president afterward, someone who could, help Trump's chances of winning. There's a chance Governor Burgum of North Carolina is being North Dakota. There's too many states that start with North something, Anyway, One of those two. North Dakota, who's been touted as a possible option, and there are a few others. In terms of, if you really wanted someone kind of managerial, I think Ron DeSantis would be an option because, he's governor of Florida and that kind of thing, possibly. I just don't see Trump needing an insider. He doesn't need a Washington insider. He's a former president himself. And he's enough of an outsider that he doesn't need an outsider. So that's not really a thing. And in terms of bringing votes, identity politics doesn't work for the U.S. So, for example, for the Republicans, I should say, choosing, say, Tim Scott. Tim Scott's a lovely guy. I mean, he's good. You've got your Christian conservative, very good man, and he happens to be African American. Republicans don't really care about that. He's seen as a good senator, and his, skin color isn't really the issue. But would that really help Trump, or would people just say, oh, Trump's just pandering, he's just trying to get black votes? So, there's that. Trump has also been going around with Neil Youngkin of Virginia. And I was just talking about Minnesota and Virginia, right? The Trump campaign is opening offices in both states, right? So Trump is actually campaigning in Virginia. Democrats are going to have to defend Virginia. It's going to cost them money they should not have to spend there. Again, that tells you that Biden's in deep trouble, right? He should be able to count on a close win in Minnesota. He should be able to count on a win in Virginia. He should be leading by double digits in New York, and he's not. So what will Trump choose? I don't know. I'd like to pitch a VP nominee. I'd like to see, just a possibility, I'd like to see someone who would be the successor, someone who would run with Trump this time, and if Trump were to lose or win, either way, this candidate, this nominee, would be our nominee in 2028 right away with Trump's endorsement. Because I think that fills the weakness that Trump only has one term. It doesn't matter which president we elect, Biden or Trump, they're both termed out. Right. I don't think Trump could run again if he lost. If Biden loses, they can't drag him across the finish line. This time, he's not coming back in 2028. They'll have to find someone new. Probably, Gavin Newsom, Hakeem Jeffries, a couple of other options they have out there, but we'll see. In any case, so I'd like to see him choose a successor. And there's one person who really rises to the top of the list of potential successors, although Trump might want to leave him where he is for the next few years and choose someone else to fill the VP role in the meantime, but I don't know. That's up to Donald. And that would be an entrepreneur and veteran, J.D. Vance. That's somebody I think would make a great VP. He's military leadership and business leadership as a tech entrepreneur. So he's a lot like Trump. He's very straightforward. He's a straight shooter. He's something of a political outsider, but he won a Senate race in 2022 in a difficult year for the GOP, where our message was divided and talking out of both sides of our tongue with, McConnell over here in a more establishment message and Trump running a more serious message of opposition. So, he managed to win in that and beat Tim Ryan and win a Rust Belt state. And I think that's where Trump definitely needs to win. He needs to win. He'll win Ohio, but he needs to have someone who can help bring in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, that kind of thing. Just my thought. I think J.D. Vance, having what I've seen of him, I think he has the leadership to succeed Trump. If not Trump, then he's the guy that I think could go after him. And so he'd be a great 2028. So we could have in this election the next 12 years of presidents lined up right here. If you're gonna have grand delusions, go for the good ones. I don't know why people on the left always want to live in these miserable delusions where everybody is evil and the world's gonna end and this kind of thing. I'm just not that. I don't know. I'm more optimistic. I see good things coming in the future. There are good times down the road. We just have to make the right choices. Anyway, Donald Trump says he has made his choice and that person will be at the debate. So he's probably going to announce at the debate. Everyone else has announced their RFK as their VP, and obviously Biden does. So we'll see what happens. On the RFK front, he did something really classy. I just have to call out, RFK doing a good thing. On June 14th, which happens to be Donald Trump's birthday, the Biden White House tweeted out, and obviously Biden himself didn't write the tweet, but, Donald Trump is mean-spirited, racist, he's evil, he's bad, we don't want him as president. and one of these kinds of tweets. And I know Donald's also a fighter. He'll go for the jugular, but usually he does that to rile up the Norman and Nancy Nutters on the left, and it serves him strategically, right? The more he gets the squad to squawk off about whatever issue or whatever, the better he looks, right? Because then they're saying the quiet part out loud, the things that people on the left don't want to say out loud. But anyway. So, he could be pretty tough, but that's the Donald. He's bombastic. He's a fighter. He's a scrapper. People like that about him. He's not somebody who just rolls over and plays dead. Bush had to take a lot of crap. It's unfortunate, but Republican presidents do. So, in any case, on that day, RFK and his team tweeted out, and you're not going to believe the audacity of this tweet. Happy birthday, Mr. President. Look forward to seeing you on the debate stage. Now just Selah. Pause and consider. Just take that in for a second. I was breathless. I was speechless. I was stunned when I read this. It's Meshuggah. He demonized no one. He dehumanized no one. Like, he wants to run against Donald Trump on the issues. Oh my God. Look, you can compete with people and say, I think I'd do a better job at this job, or I think I'd be a better president, or I think I'd be a better congressman, and not do it hatefully toward the other person. My opponent is evil. You don't have to do that. Okay, so that was a class act. Go RFK. Not supporting him. I'm still voting for Trump. But, it was good to see that there's some decency in politics. And so I just wanted to call that particular thing out. Also, that he doesn't have Secret Service protection is completely asinine. I don't know what Biden's doing. Does he want RFK to be a martyr? If we have another Kennedy assassinated, it's not going to look good for the sitting president who could have gotten him Secret Service protection. Meanwhile, RFK is talking about, this some guy who showed up dressed as a law enforcement officer purportedly with a fake badge or what have you at one of his events. That's kind of a scary thing, and unfortunately, Norman Nutters who have a little bit of intelligence can be very dangerous, right? We don't need that. So let's get him Secret Service protection. My God, he's polling 9 to 14%. Why isn't he in the debates? Ross Perot was in the debates. Ross Perot came in at 15 in 92 and 9% in 96. So, fair is fair. Let's get him into the debates. In any case, it'll be interesting to find out who Donald Trump's running mate will be, and we'll see how that goes from there. All right, moving on real quick. I have to say something about the Hunter Biden conviction. Again, it's inane, and I feel my IQ dropping. They let the serious tax charges go past the statute of limitations. So, he's not going to face any serious charges, right? And all this stuff. All of it is just to bury the case so that Joe Biden himself, the big guy, is not going to be charged. Now, again, you want the details, go listen to Ted Cruz on The Verdict. Great podcast. Ted knows all the details. He's a lawyer. I'm not going to go into it. But again, it's this using the courts to protect the president by going after his son only, right? For charges that are far less serious than they could have been. The tax charges were, could have had some real jail time, versus, using the courts to attack Donald Trump and charge him with, 34 ridiculous felonies and this kind of thing. Two-tier justice, my friends, two-tier justice. It's not fair. It's not cool. All right, final thing, talking about polls. Canada, holy mackerel. We're getting some polls out of Canada now that show that the Liberals, Justin Trudeau's party, are about to get wiped out. They are going to fall into third place behind the Quebec National Party in some polls. And NDP, which is their far left party, is also going down. So the Conservative Party of Canada looks like they have a really good chance at winning. And it's just back to this example, Justin Trudeau has run his country into the ground. He's been tyrannical. He's gone after people who disagreed with him politically. His immigration policies are absolutely insane. Insane. If they keep up going this way, by the middle of the century, half the people in Canada, half the population of Canada will be foreign born. Right? You can't live in a country where half the people are foreign born. It's not a racist thing or whatever. I'm just making the point. Immigration is where you get 10 or 15% of your population is foreign born, and that's fine. And then the next generation grows up and they're Canadians, right? They're Americans, whatever their skin color, national, we don't care. Okay, they come here, they work hard, they live, follow the law, all is well, right? We're all good with that. But half the population, no. And, that's just not going to fly. And Canadians are tired of it. So polls show Trudeau's about to get wiped out. Now, elections aren't due until, for a few years now, but it depends on how long he can last. The early elections could be on the horizon. And, of course, I'll be talking about, European politics a little later in the show, so there'll be some fun stuff there. All right, with that, I'm going to jump over to the Lippmann's Logic section, that segment, and then on to the Israeli news and the international. All right, now for Lippmann's Logic, where I talk about Walter Lippmann, the great defender of liberal democracy in the mid-20th century, who struggled to defend that way of thinking and liberalism, classical liberalism, at a time when it was very much under assault. Fascism, communism, all kinds of isms and ideologies. And even here in the United States, we had, various scares and various people pushing against freedom, against liberal democracy. And, you have a democratic republic, we're a constitutional republic, this kind of thing. Still, right, we are a liberal society in terms of the use of the term liberal as in free, open-minded, that kind of thing. So, he's defending that. So here's an excerpt from one of his books talking about perceptions of public opinion. So I'm just going to read this story that he relates. And I'd heard it before, something that was talked about fairly widely in the middle of the century, but not... we don't share these anecdotes anymore because they're not really in living memory. But this is from his book, Public Opinion, published in 1922, so just a few years after the First World War. This is the beginning of the first chapter. And he relates this story that talks about human perceptions and how we perceive things really does have a very, very great impact on our opinions. And so I just want to read this segment and leave you to think about it, right? And that's going to be your Lippmann's Logic for today. There is an island in the ocean where, in 1914, a few Englishmen, Frenchmen, and Germans lived. No cable reaches this island, and the British mail steamer comes but once in 60 days. In September, it had not yet come, and the islanders were still talking about the latest newspaper, which told about the approaching trial of Madame Caillot for the shooting of Gaston Calmet. It was, therefore, with more than unusual eagerness that the whole colony assembled at the quay on a day in mid-September to hear from the captain what the verdict had been. I'm going to take a quick aside there. So, this was a case, a French politician had an affair, a newspaper editor, this guy Calmet, was going to reveal it. And his wife, Madame Caillot, went and shot the guy. Shot him dead in his office. And this was the biggest scandal. So, Archduke Ferdinand's assassination really wasn't the leading headline in August of 1914 when the war broke out. So here, for 60 days, these people have been waiting. Hey, what was the verdict in the trial? By the way, she was found not guilty because, it was defended that, she was hysterical. She was a hysterical woman, This is 1914 we're talking. But what a defense. I mean, she was hysterical. She was trying to protect her husband. Women go nuts like this. You can't. What can you do, right? Women go hysterical. So, she can't really be held accountable for the crime. And so the French courts let her off. Wow. Isn't misogyny wonderful? I guess it worked in her favor in that case. But what a thing. I mean, go and kill someone over a sex scandal. It certainly would have ended her husband's career. In any case, that was the big story. So they're all waiting on the pier here for that story, right? Frenchmen, Germans, English alike, on this island. And it's September of 1914. They have no idea there's a war on. So I will, continue from there. So, the ship arrives, right? They learned that for 6 weeks now, those of them who were English and those of them who were French, had been fighting in behalf of the sanctity of treaties against those of them who were Germans. For 6 strange weeks they had acted as if they were friends, when in fact they were enemies. But their plight was not so different from that of most of the population of Europe. They had been mistaken for 6 weeks. On the continent, the interval may have been only 6 days or 6 hours, but there was an interval. There was a moment when the picture of Europe on which men were conducting their business as usual did not in any way correspond to the Europe which was about to make a jumble of their lives. There was a time for each man when he was still adjusting to an environment that no longer existed. All over the world, as late as July 25th, men were making goods that they would not be able to ship, buying goods that they would not be able to import. Careers were being planned, enterprises contemplated, hopes and expectations entertained, all in the belief that the world as known was the world. Men were writing books describing that world. They trusted the picture in their heads. And then, over 4 years later, on a Thursday morning, came the news of an armistice, and the people gave vent to their unutterable relief that the slaughter was over. Yet in the 5 days before the real armistice came, though the end of the war had been celebrated, several thousand young men died on those battlefields. Looking back, we can see how indirectly we know the environment in which, nevertheless, we live. We can see that the news of it comes to us now fast, now slowly, but that whatever we believe to be the true picture, we treat it as if it were the environment itself. It is harder to remember that about the beliefs upon which we are now acting, but in respect to other peoples and other ages, we flatter ourselves that it is easy to see when they were in deadly earnest about ludicrous pictures of the world. We insist, because of our superior hindsight, that the world as they needed to know it and the world as they did know it were often two quite contradictory things. We can see, too, that while they governed and thought, traded and reformed in the world as they imagined it to be, they produced results, or failed to produce any, in the world as it was. They started for the Indies and found America. They diagnosed evil and hanged old women. They thought they could grow rich by always selling and never buying. A caliph obeyed what he conceived to be the will of Allah, burned the library of Alexandria. The only feeling that anyone can have about an event he does not experience is the feeling aroused by his mental image of that event. And I wanted to read that and make that point, because we think of the world in a certain way, and we become accustomed to thinking of it in a certain way, right? For decades now, we've thought about the world as a place where America is the superpower and in charge. Speaking for myself now, obviously I'm done reading. We think of that world, and that world still exists in our heads, even when it's no longer real, right? Now we live in a world where there are several powers challenging the United States for its domination of the world, and challenging it very directly by invading and attacking our allies and murdering their citizens in barbaric and horrific ways, whether in Ukraine or in Israel. And obviously, now we have the Chinese attacking Filipino Coast Guard with knives and cutting off the thumb of one officer. So, I mean, the violence is there, okay? The violence is real. The world changed, and I understand that a lot of people missed that, right? They didn't catch that moment when China, North Korea, Russia, and Iran all got on the same page. It didn't happen overnight. It took time. And decided that they wanted to challenge American supremacy in the world. And they did this and achieved greater success, in part because we don't see the world as it is. We see it as it was. And now we're being, treated to this rude awakening that the world has changed. And one of the reasons you listen to Inside Israel News Insiders is that you get to keep up with that change. Because I don't just talk about the world as it is, which I do a lot. I also talk about the world as it will be. Because there are things that are trends that cannot change. You can't change birth rates, right? All of the 20-year-olds alive today in the world were born 20 years ago, right? So if you have a low birth rate and you have a small young population, coming up, through the years, growing older, we already know they've all been born, right? We have these data, so we have the realities. Okay, we know what's likely to happen, and so I try to convey that to you. But the point is, it is very difficult when you have a world, when you think of a world as you imagined it, or you imagine the world today as it was in the past. You can't live in the past. It's time to wake up to the realities of now. But I think that was a fair point. There you had an island full of people, French, English, and German, who didn't know that they were enemies. They had no idea there was a war on until the steamer showed up. They were waiting for the verdict in a trial, right? And then found out that the world was at war in 1914. And that shocked their world, right? Just like on December 7th, on a beautiful Sunday morning in Hawaii, America was shocked into the Second World War because the world as Americans imagined it was no longer the way the world was. And that's one of those things we should pay attention to and think about. And I keep talking about people living in delusions and this kind of thing. It's really important to live in the real world, to assess the real world and understand the real world. And you don't have to, as he's talking about, people bought goods and made, applied for import permits and tried to do, things that would never happen because a war broke out, right? People in France tried to buy things from Germany that would never arrive because, a war would break out and they had no idea. So there we are. So we can't just continue thinking that the world is as it is and hasn't changed. The world is changing all around us constantly. And it's important to stay up with those changes and not to be left in the past. So with that, we'll close this segment and go on to the Israeli news and international news after the break. If you're interested in history and life skills, go check out the Mensch-Kight Show on Spotify and on Apple, another podcast that I've created. This one a little bit more miscellaneous, talks about different life topics, history, talk about Guadalcanal, and also the birth of liberty, the process by which liberty became the dominant ideology in Anglo-American society, and how Western civilization has generally been more individualist and how it has developed these theories. So if you're interested, go check out the Mensch-Kight Show. On to the Israeli news. Man, so much going on in the U.S. and the Lippmann's logic. That took up a lot of time. So this is going to be a long episode. I apologize for the length. Unfortunately, it's taken me a little while. I had a mic die on me between segments, and I had to run out and buy a new mic, and it's just been a couple of days and a lot of stuff trying to get this episode out. But hopefully the sound quality will improve now, and I'll be able to keep making episodes. All right, Israel. Here's the fun. I keep talking about how anti-Israel bias is anti-Semitism, right? Those who delegitimize Israel. And anti-Semitism is nothing new. The aspect of trying to destroy and undermine Israel is new. But we've always had the wonders of anti-Semitism and some really ridiculous notions. Blood libels about, Jews who are, sniveling, conniving trolls with horns on their heads who drink the blood of babies and eat blood matzah and have secret space lasers. And, that's kind of the new twist, I guess. In any case, there's always this kind of nonsense. So this week, no surprise, we get more. A guy who came out of an Israeli prison, with his eyes wide, looking like he'd been terribly traumatized, and there was no one home. He'd been driven completely out of his mind and blind by the Israelis, and then we get a picture of him a couple days later, making in a selfie with some Hamas leader or what have you, and he looks normal. Everything's back to normal, I guess. But, you know, obviously Jews are sniveling, conniving trolls, so of course we would torture and torment and blind people in prison, you know, when terrorists are in custody, because of course we would, right? I mean, that's just how we are. We're bad. We've also apparently, Israel has spent a lot of time and money and resources training dogs to rape those held in Israeli prisons, prisoners in Israeli prisons. Wow. I mean, if your IQ is dropping now too, I mean, this is the kind of stuff people say. And, you know, it's just like the 500 people at the Shifa hospital and whatever. Of course, Jews would do this. You just don't know them like we do. You know, they're sniveling, conniving trolls. They're bad. They're evil. The elders of Zion, they run everything. So, you know, dogs to abuse. I mean, just wow. Whew, I don't know. And another thing that came out, of course, you know, the reason that the IDF is not, you know, the soldiers are not raping Arab women is racism. They don't see them as human beings. So they should be raping Arab. I mean, wow, people. So, I mean, it's back to the darned if you do and darned if you don't, as Gad Saad, the Godfather, rightly points out, and Jordan Peterson as well. They've both been kind of on that. Like, we're damned if we do, we're damned if we don't. If Israeli soldiers were raping Arab women, then we'd be evil and we should be destroyed. And you know, Jews are horrible people. You know, if only there were a permanent solution to them. And then, you know, IDF soldiers behave themselves, behave morally and righteously, and don't commit those kinds of crimes. And we're racists and we're dehumanizing them, you know, can't win, right? But it all comes back to that central point, right? That permanent solution. If only someone could get rid of those troublesome Jews. Just, wow. And you know, we're not the only people who get this. There are all kinds of conspiracy theories in China about the Hakka, who are kind of China's Jews, you know, somewhat nomadic. Some of them have spread themselves out around the world. Kind of a group of people who relate back to the Han Dynasty, kind of the managerial class from that time. In any case, you know, like Jews are over here, Ashkenazic Jews anyway, known for their high IQs, high intelligence, tend to rise high levels of government and this kind of thing. So, you know, they get a little bit of that too, but nobody gets it like we do. We just, well, you know, if there's a conspiracy theory out there, believe me, we're in it. The Illuminati, the Freemasons, somewhere in there. You know, I think my favorite of all of those was the Nazis. Christianity is a Jewish conspiracy to control Europeans. Like, what? I mean, you don't think Jews could have come up with something better than trying to create this whole religion? Like we couldn't be. I mean, seriously, people. I mean, I just want to say, like, if Jews were running the world, if there really were an elders of Zion or a conspiracy theory, the world would be in much better shape. Let me tell you, your portfolio would be well diversified and well balanced. Everyone would be making money hand over fist, honestly and fairly. The economy would be booming. We'd all be having a great time, and you know, life would be good. We'd all be sipping kosher wine, and you know, saying, you know. Mazel tov and l'chaim, and life would be good. Okay, the fact that, you know, everyone in the world wants to annihilate us and we're constantly under attack and put upon, I think proves that quite the opposite is the case. If anything, we don't have a lot of power. The power that we have in the United States, if you want to call it that, to get rid of, you know, anti-Semitic people in this country and attack anti-Semitic politicians, does not come from the Jews. It comes from the fact that 80% of Americans are not anti-Semites. Like, Americans believe very strongly in opposing bigotry and racism. So naturally, Americans are against this. I mean, if you're against the Jews, what would be the difference between against the Cherokee or you know, against the Sioux? I mean, there are also nations of people just like us who have, you know, certain beliefs and this kind of thing. And you know, we're just a group of people anyway. Blood libels, and the problem is, I can sit here and I can joke about it and tell you about it, and we can have a chuckle at how stupid these people are and how inane as Hannah Arendt used to say, the banality of evil, right? They're one day Gaza is an open air prison for, contained by the Israelis. The next day, oh, Gaza used to be so beautiful. Look what they've done. They found the place back to the Stone Age. Oh my God. Pick one, right? It's like, which is it now? Right. So there's that. And, I just, like I said, we can have a chuckle about it here, the insiders, but this gets, Jews get killed. Okay. People take this stuff and they kill Jews because of it. Right. In the streets. They will attack us in the streets. They will murder Jews because not, Elder Ryan is, what I mean? That kind of thing. They're Jews who have kippot on in Brooklyn who get attacked, So, and it's happening almost on a daily basis. Jews are being attacked constantly. The religious-based attacks, discriminatory, hate crimes in the U.S. It's Jews. Almost all against Jews. There is no problem with Islamophobia in this country, but we have a serious problem with anti-Semitism. All right, moving on. Anyway, so Netanyahu has announced that the major operation in Gaza to destroy Hamas's military and governing capability is over, and they are shifting gears into a new operation. So now that Israel went into Rafah and took out the last, above ground, well, I guess they have tunnels too, but the formal Hamas infrastructure there. Now Hamas is kind of underground, quite literally. In any case, they're hiding out with the civilians in other parts of the Gaza Strip, what's left of them. And of course, that population is sympathetic. 80% of them support Hamas, and they overwhelmingly support what happened on October 7th and want to see more of it. And they'll want to see it again, right? Their opinions haven't changed. What can be done to change that? No one said. So this is part of that post-war plan that Bibi did not announce publicly, but apparently now they're making the switch. So now the operation is going to change nature. And of course, this comes at a time when Israel is shifting gears to look northward, which I'm going to talk about here in a second. But the change of operations is a good sign. It means obviously the major offensive against Hamas is over, and we're looking to the long-term strategy now of rooting out Hamas ideologically and terrorism overall and trying to establish, something better in Gaza, something that isn't terrorism and all that good stuff. Okay, so there's that. The day after the hostages were rescued, and I want to take another moment again, just Baruch Hashem, thank God we got them back. I was so happy to hear Noah Argamani came back. I mean, honestly, after October 7th, I really, I really didn't think we were going to see any of them again. I mean, that's just the people we're dealing with here. But thankfully, we've managed to get quite a few back, one way or another. Okay, so the day after the hostages were returned, General Benny Gantz, former Air Force general turned politician, Benny Gantz has left the coalition. And he bolted, saying that he thinks Bibi's made a bunch of mistakes in Gaza and that things are going to go badly there. Now, to mention, Bibi's coalition had a majority in parliament, right? You have to have a coalition of political parties, several political parties, to get to a majority in a multi-party proportional system. More on that another time. For those who are long-term listeners, you've heard that lecture many, many times, so I'll spare it this time. But in any case, Bibi's government has a majority and can remain in power for the foreseeable future. Benny Gantz joined as part of an emergency unity government in order to fight the battle in Gaza, and he and Eisenkot joined Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, in being the three men who led that operation. They did fairly well at it. But Benny Gantz has left. Now, that shouldn't come as a great surprise to insiders, because as I told you a couple episodes back, I did this deep dive into the current state of Israeli politics, the polls and all that. And at the end of it, I said, and now you can forget all that. Everything I just said, throw it in the trash can, right? Because the next election, which is almost certainly going to be 2025 or later, that election is going to be based on, the issues in that election are going to be about the military successes or failures that happen between now and then, right? So if Gaza is turned around, if there's less violence there, if things turn out better, Hezbollah is destroyed, things will look very good for Bibi. Bibi may be able to get reelected to one more term, okay? I don't know, right? But the point is that's going to be the thing, not current politics. Nothing that's on the table now or was on the table before October 7th is going to have an impact on those elections for the most part. Just like I said, 1944 was a very different presidential election in the U.S. from 1940. In 1940, you had a number of issues, and that was very different from 36. 36 was very domestic. 40 was very international. By the time we had 1944, a whole different world. I mean, we were in the middle of a war. We got to finish this war and move on from there. And then you get to 1948 and we're back to mostly domestic issues, another world, right? And the Cold War. Okay, so that's my point. This next election is going to be like the 1948 election. It'll be about how the war turned out, what the post-war situation is, and how people are feeling about those things and issues in the country at that time. Benny Gantz notes that Bibi is rising in the polls again, right? And if you've been following on X, if you're on X, formerly Twitter, and you follow Inside Israel News there, I keep you up to date on a more regular basis with the news on a day-to-day basis, then you will know, of course, kind of how this has been going, because I've been talking there a little bit about polls and this kind of thing. And in a key political poll, Bibi's star is rising. His numbers have started to come back up. He had a lot of egg on his face about October 7th. He's the security and prosperity prime minister, at least that's how he bills himself. And we've had neither, right? So October 7th, we had no security, so we had to fight this big war. And it's difficult to prosper at a time when you're fighting for survival against these Iranian proxies. Now, thankfully, companies like Intel have stayed in Israel, and for the most part, they haven't pulled out. NVIDIA, those companies, been very helpful to Israel. We've had a lot of good, the economic situation in Israel has remained stable, but a lot of people have had to leave to go fight, because the reservists, right? They have to leave their job and go fight, and then they can come back months later, assuming that they are not injured or killed. So, Intel has delayed, for example, the expansion of their plant. Now, that makes some sense because there's probably another 6 months of major fighting that's about to go on here before things settle down. So there's no reason to start building, big R&D plants and expanding plants when the situation is kind of fluid like that. In any case, Bibi is security and prosperity. And those things, as the security situation improves, Bibi's star is rising. And Benny Gantz, being an opposition leader to Bibi, bolted from the coalition. He does not want to contribute to Bibi rehabilitating his career. I think that's a mistake personally. I think Benny Gantz would do better just to stay in the coalition. He and Yair Lapid need to get over this Bibi is horrible thing and jump on the bandwagon. Israel needs a unity government. It needs the leadership that they can provide. That's just me. Now, Israeli voters, as I talked about the polls, there are polls that suggest that Bibi would lose, but most of the polls suggest, as I discussed when I went through, that it would be another stalemate. And if you've been listening to the show, you remember we had a stalemate in 2021, and it was almost a stalemate again in 2022. So Israel's had 5 elections. 4 of them were stalemates, and then at the last minute, the change block came in after 2021 election and patched together these 8 parties from the far right to the far left, and it barely worked for about a year, and then fell apart, and Bibi won the next election. So anyway. That's kind of where Israel has been historically. But right now, the war is the issue. So that's what's going on. So again, the reasons that Benny Gantz bolted the coalition are not surprising to insiders because I've already told you guys. I've told you what's happening. Likewise, the conflict with Hezbollah is heating up. Now, Hezbollah has been firing rockets, sending drones, firing anti-tank missiles, and mortars and other, otherwise bombarding northern Israel since October 7th. Right? They have not ceased. So this idea that somehow Israel's, we're going to hear all about it, Israel's attacking Lebanon. No, Hezbollah has been attacking Israel. Tens of thousands of Israelis have been evacuated from the northern part of the country for their own safety. They want to go back to their homes. And after October 7th, the horrors of October 7th, Israelis have to have security, right? They deserve to live in security, in peace and security, right? These Iranian proxies have to be destroyed. Likewise, the Saudis, Emiratis, and in Bahrain, everyone is looking on to see, hey, the UAE and Bahrain have normalized relations with Israel. The Saudis have been considering doing that. If they take the next step, can Israel truly be effective against Iranian proxies, right? And that's That's the real test. In any case, recently this was news that the IDF has approved an operation into Lebanon to root out Hezbollah, and of course, the Hezbollah is doing nothing to de-escalate. Right? They are not backing down in any serious way, in such a way that they would, de-escalate the conflict. Right? They're definitely not backing down. They want this conflict. Israel's, they're going to have to go in there. They're going to have to root these guys out and create a more secure situation. Again, not that much a surprise to insiders, because someone told you that there'd be a conflict in Lebanon and that it would be coming sometime in June. Right? As I explained, you have to fight. Lebanon is a different place from Gaza. It's up in the mountains. It's very, it used to be very forested, but now there's been a bunch of fires. The brush has burned away, so there's fewer places to hide. But Lebanon is a different climate. You have to fight wars there in the summer. You really can't fight there in the winter. So the IDF has to go through the summer, and by October, they really need to be pulling back. So I pointed out there were a lot of leaves for like the Golani Brigade when they were pulled out of Gaza. A lot of them were put on leave until June. Time to prepare for, future conflict. So, the prophet Isaac, I told you a lot of these things are going to happen. And that's one good reason to listen to Inside Israel News. To be an insider and get your 20 bonus IQ points is that you have a good idea what's coming down the road. So I want to talk more about that in the next episode, and we'll see how that starts to play out. As I've said, Hezbollah is a different kind of war, much stronger command and control. Their Hezbollah terrorist fighters are more like professional soldiers, although they are not. They're still paramilitary. The point is that they've been fighting in Syria. They're battle-hardened. They're battle-tested. They are better trained, better prepared, better equipped, better led. They have more technology. It's going to be a different kind of war. But once it is done, once Hezbollah has been neutered, very much like Hamas has been, and they are neutralized, then Israel will be able to live in greater security. And at the very least, it'd take those proxies decades to recover, but we're going to do what we can to make sure that that recovery doesn't happen, especially if we can work closely with Israel's new allies. And if the Saudis will normalize relations, and perhaps we can work together to see Lebanon rebuilt, since they haven't recovered from the 2006 war yet, 20 years later. Maybe we can work together to see Lebanon rebuilt. We're working with the international community, the Saudis and Israel, to see Lebanon rebuilt as something better than it was. It used to be a majority Christian country. It used to be a really nice place. Beirut is like the Paris of the Middle East. It's beautiful. First of all, a lot of French spoken there. The Arabic that's spoken in Lebanon is like the French of Arabic, that dialect. Like it's the classy, elegant Arabic, right? And so it used to be a really nice place. It was where everyone had their vacation homes and what have you. But now it's a hellhole. And it has been since the 70s, because the Palestinians started a civil war, kicked off a civil war there. And the Muslims, the Christians have been fighting. A lot of Christians had to leave. A lot were killed. So, it's been a mess. It would be nice if it could get back to being something more prosperous. That would be a beautiful thing. So I'm going to dive in with international news and then wrap up here shortly. On to the international news. Hearing about a terror attack in Dagestan today. A horrible attack. 15 people killed. A priest had his throat slit in his church. Synagogue set ablaze. Most of the dead are police officers, it turns out. And at least 4 assailants, 4 terrorists have been neutralized. It seems another case of Islamic terrorism. While I'm not normally sympathetic to the Russian cause, no one should have to suffer that, obviously. And it's another example of the kind of chaos that Russia is risking by, because Putin has bet the farm, bet the country on this war in Ukraine. He doesn't have the resources to be on top of all of this kind of stuff. When your police are going around arresting people and charging them to, years in prison for treason if they gave money to Ukraine, a small amount of money to Ukraine, then, they're not chasing down terrorists. In any case, horrible thing, and, horrifying loss of life, and not something we're going to celebrate, even though, obviously, Russia is our enemy. That is an enemy country. They are hostile to the interests of the United States. Speaking of the war in Ukraine, the war seems to go well, and now that U.S. aid has come back, Ukraine is defending itself better, holding the Russians back. The U.S. is allowing Ukraine to use U.S. munitions to fire over the border at Russia as need be, not just in the Kharkov region, but wherever, Kharkiv. It was Kharkov in the Second World War, so this is what's stuck in my head, but it's Kharkiv. And, but wherever the Russians are shooting from their side of the border, Ukraine is allowed to shoot back with U.S. munitions. So good job there. It's a good thing, finally. And we're getting more stuff out there about this stuff. Trump out there saying, that Zelensky's a great salesman and this kind of thing. Disappointing comments. Not a fan of Trump's approach to Ukraine. Generally support the things that he says other than that, but that's one thing I just can't abide, and I didn't think those comments were appropriate. I don't disagree with him very often, but that's one situation where I very much do. We need to be opposing all of our enemies, not just those, but and it's not Donald Trump saying this, but we're getting all these people out there that Zelensky's he's the welfare queen, he's begging for money and he's so corrupt and this kind of thing. And well, of course he is, right? I mean, he's money grubbing, selfish. He's out to get whatever he can out of people, to screw people over. I mean, he's a Jew, right? I mean, that's how all the Jews are. They're sniveling, conniving trolls with horns on their heads. So just not pleased with the way people are approaching this. There were people who spoke of Winston Churchill that way, back in the 40s. We don't remember a lot of that stuff now, Charles Lindbergh running around and this kind of stuff, because we're on the other side of history. We have hindsight. But when you listen to some of the crap that was said back then, you realize, there were people who were against opposing the Nazis. And it's kind of sickening, So anyway, so that's that. Now I have to move on because there's so much other stuff to talk about. The EU has approved their $50 billion loan to Ukraine. Ukraine is getting money from the interest of seized assets, Russian assets, and assets of Russians under sanction. They're not taking their money; they're taking the interest from that money that it would be gaining in as invested, and they're using that to back loans to Ukraine. So that's a good precedent right there. So, everyone's saying, well, Europe needs to do their part. Well, they are. $50 billion. I mean, it's not exactly matching the the U.S. is now up to about over $100 billion to Ukraine overall. Now, again, that aid doesn't go to Ukraine. Let's not write them a check for $100 billion, right? This recent $60 billion aid package. 90% of that is spent here making weapons that are sent over there. Weapons used to defend Ukraine and attack Russians, the Russians who are our enemies. How do we know they are our enemies? They say they're against the U.S. They want to defeat U.S. power and NATO. They claim that NATO is a hostile force, and they're invading an ally, committing mass murder, rape, and pillaging, and all this kind of fun stuff. So I think that pretty solid, right? They have the largest nuclear, outside the U.S., they have the largest nuclear arsenal in the world. But I think it's safe to call it the second now, even though they typically deploy more warheads actively than the U.S. does. But in any case, they're very dangerous. Okay, CSTO, Armenia is leaving. That's basically Russia's equivalent of NATO. Armenia is leaving, and now they have had a debate in their parliament about joining the EU. A lot of protests in Georgia as well. Georgia was also invaded by Russia in 2008. A lot of Georgians want to see the pro-Russian government ousted from power. And so Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan will all be, against Russia. But Armenia is switching sides. That's because of the recent problems they've had with Azerbaijan, but also Russia hasn't done anything for them. They're kind of busy somewhere else. All right. Big news, European elections. So the European elections have seen the center-right and far-right parties do very well. So overall, the center-right is one. Now, just taking a step back, the European Parliament doesn't do much. Okay, there's a European commission that's made up of all the members and represents the governments of the members and this kind of thing. And there's a council of ministers. Those guys actually, those are the people who run the EU. When you're always hearing, it's the unelected bureaucrats, that's because those people run the EU. The European Parliament is a relatively weak institution. But the shift to the center-right is very important because now the center-left parties no longer control the European Parliament and more right-wing parties are going to have a say. Now, that election was a huge upset for the governing parties in several countries. Before I go into those countries that were upset by it, at this point it's all optics. Again, the European Parliament really doesn't do anything, so it's not really anything worth talking about, but it has certainly frustrated several governments. Let's talk about the big winner, Giorgia Meloni in Italy, who's their far-right prime minister. If she's far-right, then I'm leftist. She's not far-right. She's for, pro-Italian. Let's just put it that way. Italy for Italians. I don't know. Anyway, so, Giorgia Meloni, her party did very well. So she's the one leader in Europe who's come out well in this. And that means that she's popular and she remains popular. And that's a good thing. Good for Giorgia Meloni. Okay? Very cool. But everyone else is in deep doo-doo. Let's just say. So let's go through them. Germany. Alternative für Deutschland. They call it far right, so let's just use that language because it's a right-wing anti-immigration party, more nationalist. But the members of the party keep getting in trouble for shooting their mouth off. One of the leaders said something about being a member of the SS doesn't automatically make somebody a war criminal. It's one of those things that could be technically true. Toward the end of the war, there were lots of teenagers recruited into the SS who didn't really do anything and, were captured by the Allies. And, you could argue, okay, well, they were compelled to join and this kind of thing. Okay, but that's splitting hairs, all right? Almost everyone who was in the SS was a war criminal. Once the Soviets figured out that there were certain tattoos that the SS members had, they hunted them down and exterminated them to the best of their ability, except for those in the SS who had joined the Stasi, the East German secret police. They and the Gestapo. I mean, it was just a quick, easy, they were already kind of controlling the country, and then now they're working for the Soviets, Hitler, Stalin. Hey, it's all good. As long as I get to keep my head and my pulse and keep doing the horrible things that I do. So you have that. In any case, but just shooting his mouth, it's not something you need to say. Okay, it's not something that needs to be brought up in public. It's Germany we're talking about. German political leaders don't need to be going out and dredging up things from the Second World War and making dumb comments about it. But it's a fairly new party, and the political leaders of that party are amateurs, and this kind of thing happens. But generally, their policies, anti-immigration and, pro-Germany, right? And fighting the cultural influences of foreigners. Now, of course, Germany's demographic situation is abysmal. Germany is about to become a pastoral country. They're no longer going to be an industrial economy soon. And they've made a lot of mistakes getting rid of nuclear power. I mean, Germany's a huge, huge mess. We have a word for this in Hebrew, balagan. It's a big mess. It's a disaster. Balagan. Or you could say oi gewalt, and it's a convulsion. I don't know. Anyway, so the point is that's more of an exclamation of, oh my God, oi gewalt. Anyway, so Germany, alternative doing very well in the election. Olaf Scholz is the Bundeskanzler, is the leader of the German government, is from the SPD, the Social Democrats. They did very poorly. So did the Greens overall. Throughout Europe, the Green Party is in bad shape. So that's some of the shift there. So as I mentioned, when I talked about German politics back in 2021, in their most recent election, they've got elections due next year, if they make it that far. And I'm not going to go into depth here, but you can go back and listen to those episodes that I did about German politics. The fact is, when the election took place, the Freie Demokratik and the Grüne the Free Democrats and the Green parties. The Free Democrats are like the free market pro-business party, right? And led by Christian Lindner, and the Greens, Grüne, led by Annalena Baerbock. They formed together what was called the Citrus Coalition, because this is the wonderful thing about Germany. All of the parties are represented by colors, and they're just in love with this notion of the colors, right? So Freie Demokratik is yellow, that's their color, and Grüne, of course, is green. So yellow and green are citrus colors, right? Limes and lemons and this kind of thing. So they formed a citrus coalition, and they decided to work with SPD, which is represented by red, ergo the traffic light coalition, because it's red, yellow, green. Right, and so that's that coalition. If the had joined with the Christian Democrats, the center-right party, then CDU is represented by black. That would be called a Jamaican coalition, because it would be black, yellow, and green, the colors of the Jamaican flag. Germans and their colors in the it's all it's all a big joke, but it is funny, the way that they do their politics. In any case, very embarrassing for the government, very embarrassing for the SPD. Olaf Scholz is already kind of a weak leader. He didn't come to power by the SPD having a big victory. He came to power because the Citrus Coalition chose him. And there's a very good chance the CDU is going to win the next election and form the next coalition government, possibly a Jamaican coalition, but that also depends. The left is kind of imploding. New left-wing parties are rising, and the left is fracturing in Germany. So it's difficult to see the future there, but I'll analyze that when that election comes up. In any case, the European Parliament elections were a huge embarrassment for the sitting government. Belgium also held national elections, and at the same time, and the sitting government lost. The prime minister resigned. So in Belgium, it's a big balagan. It's a big mess. Right-wing parties that are anti-immigration and what have you won in the European Parliament, and that is a big embarrassment there as well. And we just saw in the Netherlands, just north of Belgium, that Geert Wilders is leading the government now after a long coalition negotiating process, after his party won the parliamentary elections there. And I've been a long time a great fan of Geert Wilders. Don't agree with everything he says, but it takes stones to stand up to all of the claims of racism or whatever, and say that you stand up for European values. Right? We fought hard to create a situation where women are equal, where homosexuals are treated fairly, where, we live in a society that's open and free, people can dress how they want, live how they want, and all this kind of thing. We don't need bigotry. We don't need anti-Semitism, and, we don't need in Europe to have beliefs that are contrary to European values. Those who embrace European values are most welcome. Those who want to blow up buildings and launch political agendas that are for terrorism and against European values and freedom and that kind of thing, we don't support. So go Geert Wilders. Okay, France. France is the big story here. I've mentioned to you guys before, I just want to say here, that the French political system is crazy. Okay, so if you think politics are crazy here, have I got a surprise for you? I've also talked about French elections. I was talking about Valérie Pécresse and all this kind of thing. So let me just really briefly recap the political situation. The French, for a long time, had two main political parties: the Socialistes, which is exactly what it says it is, the left, the socialists, and the Gaullists. They've gone by different names, most recently Les Républicains. And that's the center-right party. It's essentially built around Charles de Gaulle, who was president when they began the Fifth Republic in the late 50s, after the Fourth Republic collapsed, the post-war republic. So you have this political system in France that's kind of crazy. You have a president who's directly elected to originally a 7-year term and now a 5-year term. Parliament, the Assemblée Nationale, is also elected to a 5-year term. They're elected from single-member elective districts, not proportional representation. So it's very much like the House of Representatives here, except that they have the election and then they have a runoff 2 weeks later. So just bear in mind that the prime minister, the premier, as they say in France, they lead the domestic policy, the president handles the foreign policy, and generally kind of leads the government. Typically, they want them to be the same party. They don't like cohabitation. They don't like having different parties. When there was this situation that took place back when Jacques Chirac was president, that because the president had a 7-year term, for 2 years they had, for after 2 years, and he was elected, and 2 years later there were parliamentary elections, and the Socialist Party won. And Lionel Jospin was the prime minister, the premier, for 5 years. So that was very bad. And so they changed their constitution to shorten the presidential term, so that in 2002 and from then forward, presidents would all have 5-year terms and the elections would be coincident. Now, usually it's been the case that the Gaullists have been in power. There were very rare occasions, 2 terms of the years that François Mitterrand was president. Now, Mitterrand was technically socialist, but he had been part of the Vichy government, the collaborationist French government during the Second World War, that was during the German occupation, and so he was a controversial figure. But up till we got to 2012, the Gaullists were generally in charge. Then in that election in 2012, François Hollande won and the Socialists were in power for a time. And they did such a great job, that in 2017 election, they got wiped out. Along came this new guy, Emmanuel Macron, who's still the president of France. He's serving his 2nd term now. And he formed another party called En Marche that was center-left. He's a former investment banker, so he's a kind of a pro-business, center-left political figure. And he took the center and destroyed the Socialist Party. Basically, they vanished in that election. And he got a majority in Parliament back in 2017, and everything was good. Then we came to 2022. He's been controversial enough, and you've got the yellow vest protests and all this kind of thing going on. So when that election happened, he won re-election, because in the French presidential election, you have 2 rounds. You have general election, and then the 2 candidates who receive, if no one receives a majority, and usually they don't, then the top 2 candidates go on to a runoff. And he went on to a runoff with Marine Le Pen, twice, actually. And she's from France Nationale, now National Rally Nationale. They are a right-wing party originally founded by Jean-Marie Le Pen, Marine Le Pen's father, who was anti-Semitic and very nationalistic and that kind of thing. She's more mainstream, the party. It purports no longer to be anti-Semitic, and a lot of Jews in France are starting to vote that way, feeling that they would provide better security. They have had ties to Russia in the past, but it's not entirely clear what their relationship with Russia would be in all of this, so maybe we shouldn't, I don't know, let's not be too excited there. In any case, they're a very right-wing, anti-immigration nationalist party. They want to deport migrants from France, and they get a lot of support for that. On the other side of En Marche, there's a populist, surprise you, populist communists, because this is France. And of course there are. This by Jean-Luc Mélenchon. His party is kind of, their platform doesn't really make a lot of sense, but they're communists. What do you say? So it's kind of a popular leftist candidate. So I quipped after the last election that the next election was likely to be between these populist communists and these ultra right-wing nationalists, because of course now serving at his 2nd term, Macron's not running again. He's termed out. So what are we going to do here, right? In any case, and I don't think he could win another election anyway. So this is the situation. So in the last parliamentary election, no one won a majority, which is very strange. Usually when the president wins, you elect the president's party, and they end up winning. Even when En Marche was like the 3rd party, they weren't one of the major parties. They ended up becoming the majority party back in the 2017 election. A big upset for France. Well, we're going to see what happens here. It's not looking good in parliamentary elections. With the European elections, he's dissolved Parliament and called early elections. So these elections will be for Parliament for the next 3 years until the next election in 2027, which will be both presidential and parliamentary elections. So Macron himself is not on the ballot, but his party is, and they do not look good in the polls. They're trailing in third place, and it looks like the extremes of French politics want to be extremes. I was joking, a few years back when I covered the French election. It's like you want to poke France with a stick and say, "Hey, be interesting," and then not like that. You guys are going nuts over there. So that is a fallout from that. We'll see what the elections in France are going to be. Most likely, things are going to, the Assemblée Nationale will continue to be split and not have anyone in the majority, but it's probably going to see gains by Jean-Luc Mélenchon's populist leftists and gains by National Rally, the far-right party under Marine Le Pen. So then, those basically we're probably going to see some kind of coalition, center-right or center-left, and it'll be interesting to see how that goes. It's going to be trouble. But that's France for you. Okay, real quick, I have to say something about UK. There's elections coming up on July 4th, an auspicious day for Britain to have elections. Right? On the day when American colonists gave the finger to Britain and said, we're going our own way in 1776. So not a great day for Britain to have an election. In any case, they are having an election, and it's nuts. The Conservative Party has been the dominant party in the 20th century. Maggie Thatcher's sort of populist free market economic policies, very Reagan-esque, although Britain had much bigger economic problems than the U.S. When Maggie Thatcher came to office. Those politics have been very popular. So when the Conservatives abandoned them after Thatcher's ignominious drop kick from politics in 91, John Major went a different direction. Tony Blair, who was with Labour, Scottish MP, he grabbed this idea of, hey, what if we take Thatcherite free market populism and match it with the center left? And he won in 97. And, for the next 13 years, basically, Britain would be governed by Labour. Well, that ended in 2010. And since 2010, the Conservatives have been, in one form or another, in office. But right now they're in deep trouble. The Conservative Party has not had an effective answer to Brexit. They did under Boris Johnson, but then Boris Johnson had to resign over scandals over the COVID thing. His government's failure to handle COVID well and Brexit problems have basically destroyed the Tories, the Conservative Party. The Tories is a reference to older stuff in British history. I'll describe it more in depth another time. So this is the situation they find them in now. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives are in desperate shape. We knew that Labour was going to beat them. Keir Starmer has tried to move away from the Jeremy Corbyn anti-Semitic left, but he has sort of tried to go in the Tony Blair direction, but he's got all these vast plans for government spending and no plans on where to get the money. Right? So taxes are definitely going up if they win. And people are pointing out this is basically the last time there will be a populist left-wing government, basically. They're probably going to win this election and then 5 years later be completely and utterly destroyed for all time by the next election. And what's interesting is we're seeing the seeds of that destruction now because Nigel Farrage is back. He's back from outer space. Nigel Farrage led the Brexit campaign, and he has formed a new party called Reform. And Reform is, they're in this election. They're now polling in second place. Some polls have them, as far as eight points ahead of the Conservatives. Other polls have them, 1 or 2 points ahead, but he's come into second place. Right-wing voters in Britain are so disaffected, so frustrated with the Tories that they're not even supporting the party anymore. And slowly but surely, as Reform has risen in the polls, as they've gained greater notoriety and become more mainstream, they're getting more votes. So the Tories may finish a very distant third. Now, Britain has a first-past-the-post election system, just like here in the U.S. So if you get the most votes in a constituency, like our congressional districts, you win. And, Parliament has over 600 members, and they represent, England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland, a couple other places. So Isle of Man and so on and so forth. So these, you have this Parliament. These elections, I mean, the Tories could be completely devastated. Like there could be very few of them in office because Labour could end up sweeping the country. SNP, Scottish Nationalist Party, is also imploded. Labour has always depended on their seats in Scotland. There aren't that many there, but they really need them. There's a good chance they're going to get their Labour seats back in Scotland. So they have a chance to have this big majority. And significant part because the Tories, the right-wing votes are split. But if Reform becomes the second party, if they get seats in Parliament, if they become the party that's up and coming, then in the next election, they may have a chance to be at least the second party, but have a really good chance of destroying Labour the way Labour is going to destroy the Tories in this election. So we will see how that goes. In the meantime, I, for one, I've preferred a certain group of Tories, the David Davis and the more Thatcherite anti-European crowd for a long time myself. Now, I'm not a Brit, so it doesn't matter. I'm an American, right? But I've kind of rooted for them. And I will admit I rooted for Tony Blair as well because he was a Thatcherite. So, I'm sad to see the Tories go. At the same time, they kind of deserve it. Theresa May weakened the party significantly. Liz Truss tried to make some major reforms when she became prime minister, and that kind of fell apart. And Rishi Sunak really hasn't done the job. So, that's that. Be interesting to see how it all turns out. All right, so chaos in Europe. Fascinating stuff. Real quick, I hate to end on a negative note, so I'll find something positive to say after this. But let's just make a note, okay? Just real quick, okay? The genocide in Gaza, they're slaughtering them, 19,000 people out of 2 million. I mean, and they're mostly terrorists. And, Israel has the best urban combat record in history. Like they've made a new standard. The U.S. is never going to be able to reach that standard. I don't know that our rules of engagement will ever be that good. In any case, they have not been up till now. Okay. In any case, there's all this nonsense about this genocide. So I just wanted to take a note, right? Last year, I talked about the civil war in Sudan and some of the forces. You can go back and listen to those episodes and learn about what's going on there. Millions of people are displaced. Purportedly, millions are dead. Huge conflict in Sudan. No Jews, no news, right? Has nothing to do with Jews, so nobody cares. I mean, they're just Africans, right? I want that war to end, but I also want the general and the the coup government that kind of overthrew the civilian government. I didn't like that they had a coup, but I hope that they are able to establish a stable government because the other guys are working with Wagner, and they're basically the Janjaweed, the people who committed the genocide in Darfur are the other party to this conflict. So they're essentially terrorists. It would be very wonderful to see them go down to defeat. But in the meantime, there's this huge war going on there. You had big problems in the Sahel, in Nigeria, conflicts all throughout Nigeria, Christians being murdered and tortured and tormented. It's got to stop. I mean, the Nigerian government needs to get a handle on this, and if they can't, maybe they need to call for help, outside help. Okay, somebody needs to help the Nigerians, and this conflict has to stop. Christians should not be killed. No, people shouldn't be killed for these kinds of reasons anyway. Group, but these Christians should not be dying in Nigeria, right? Being murdered in horrible ways by Boko Haram and these terrorists that are there. Fighting in Myanmar. No Jews, no news. Haven't heard about it. Don't care. There's people out there, you're just out in the streets protesting for Palestine and, this kind of thing. So, I mean, it's very sad, yet these things are happening, and I wish that they were not. Myanmar's been a big mess for a long time. But the fact is, there are conflicts around the world, and there are going to be more. As the international order breaks down, as we leave the era of Bretton Woods, as we see the U.S. pull back from the world, as demographics kicks in, we're going to, the demographic winter, we're going to see more conflicts. The world is going to become a more chaotic place. But it doesn't mean, it doesn't have to be. We can do something about that a little bit here and there. The U.S. is overextended at the moment, but if we stand up to the Axis powers in World War III by proxy, Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran, and basically defeat and contain them, then, hopefully without ever having to confront them directly, if we can contain them, we can live in a fairly secure world where things can get better. Okay? All right. Last thing, I guess I do have something positive. I'm really excited about this, so I'm going to leave off on this. Javier Milei. Milei is awesome. He's pro-Israel. He's pro-Ukraine. He's a libertarian. He has axed the Argentinian government. Argentina has been a big problem. The Perón was a dictator there for a long time. He had the Falklands War. The Peronists are leftists, and they've been in power in Argentina for too long. They've totally devastated the economy. And Milei has come in. He's chopped the government. He's pushing tax reforms that seem to be passing Congress right now. They're doing the sort of detailed work in the Senate. Once that's done, it'll need to go back to their House of Representatives and eventually back to Milei's desk. If he passes those tax reforms, though, Argentina is going to prosper. And, all the naysayers that are anti-libertarian and against people on the right, this is going to be another great success. And it's going to show that government is the problem in a lot of these cases. Socialism is the problem. Get the government out of the economy. So go Milei. Milei. Ole. So I hope he has great success down there. Good times. All right. Well, it's been a long episode. It's been a good one. I'll kind of get back on track here in recording and try to get them out more often now that my mic issues seem to be fixed for the moment. Anyhow, with that, I will say, as always, goodbye, lehitrot.
Writers of the history, stand with me. Look into my eyes and see. People go away but never say goodbye. Someone stole the moon tonight, took my light. Everything is black and white. Who's the fool who told you boys don't cry? Hours and hours and flowers. Life is no game for the cowards. Why? The time goes by. Every day I'm losing my mind, holding on in this mysterious ride, dancing in the storm. We got nothing to hide. Take me home and leave the world behind. Baby, promise me that never again. I'm still wet from this October rain. October rain. Living in a fantasy, ecstasy. Everything is meant to be. We shall pass, but love will never die. Hours and hours and flowers. Life is no game for the cowards. Why? The time goes away. Every day I'm losing my mind, holding on in this mysterious ride, dancing in the storm. We got nothing to hide. Take me home and leave the world behind. Baby, promise me that never again. I'm still wet from this October rain. October rain. October rain. שותפים לישון, אין מקום, אין אותי מיום ליום, כולם ילדים טובים אחד אחד. Bring them back home now.